I studied with Douglas Burden in Ottawa, Canada in 2007. He recently retired after 50 spectacular years in the bass trombone chair of Ottawa's National Arts Centre Orchestra, and I thought this a perfect time to sit back and chat with him about his 50-year legacy as bass trombonist in a top-level orchestra. The interview ended up being 3 hours long, so I've divided it into three parts. The first part today covers the performing element of his career, notably his bass trombone equipment over all of those years, injury prevention, longevity, and listening recommendations for the trombonist and musician in general. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Please hit subscribe to support the channel and for further top-line bass trombone and trombone interviews on the channel. Thanks very much and enjoy. So a huge warm welcome from Germany to Ottawa, Canada, Mr. Douglas Burden, fairly fresh out of a spectacular 50-year career as bass trombonist in Ottawa's National Arts Centre Orchestra. Douglas Burden, thanks so much for joining us today in this fairly cold January day here in Germany. Last week we still had some snow. I've heard you obviously have, when we have snow, you have absolute tons of snow. How are you? And first of all, a massive thank you from the bass trombone community. That has to be said, in my opinion, for all the fantastic notes you've given us and for the fantastic inspirations through your playing and your teaching. But first of all, through your playing, which has now officially ended. Your teaching has not, if I understood correctly. Thank you very much. How are you doing? How has it been since finishing?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And it's wonderful to be able to reconnect through this interview, even though we've been in touch through emails and Facebook over the year. But yeah, I think I'm adjusting quite well to what I've been counseled and read about. I'm calling it a new season of my life. And with that new season comes new opportunities. And for the moment, I actually haven't played a note since my final concert, June 25th, 2022. But I am teaching. I have some wonderful students at the University of Ottawa and others that come and take individual lessons with me. And I love teaching. In fact, yesterday afternoon I had 5 hours solid of it, so it was a long day. That was after you mentioned the snow. We had 20 centimeters of snow dumped the previous night, so I had to clear that from the driveway before I could get down to the university. So it was a long day, but something that I love.
Fantastic. So we haven't actually spoken since 2009. I meant to say that in this introduction. So that's quite spectacular. We have had digital contact, but this is the first conversation, which I find spectacular in itself.
That's amazing.
So it is amazing, and modern technology. This is the second take. Last week we had technical problems, but that's irrelevant now. The first big question I think a lot of people want to know, myself especially, is 50 years. I mean, that's a lifetime for some people. You stuck it out. And longevity is the word that's come to mind. What is the secret? I mean, what kept you going? Did you actually ever have? I know you've mentioned in a different interview some tendonitis and issues of subtle injuries, but did you ever have periods where you couldn't play? And what is your secret for keeping it going for so long?
Well, those are a series of questions, which I'll probably take a series of answers. First and foremost, I'm very thankful for having good health to begin with. I'm thankful for being in the right place at the right time that opened the door for me to start playing in Ottawa when I was a first-year student at the Eastman School of Music. And the safety of travel, the back and forth between Ottawa and Rochester, which is about a 5-hour trip one way through all kinds of weather, literally. Got me through through those 4 years, and then I moved to Ottawa, was offered the teaching position at the University of Ottawa at that time. And the the orchestra itself has evolved over those 50 years. When I started playing with NACO, National Arts Center Orchestra, it was very much a classical era orchestra. So Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, and when we played Brahms, that was really big. But also, the city of Ottawa was relatively small in those days. So part of my uh, influences towards trombone, because for 6 years I played cornet and trumpet prior to the trombone. I actually started playing cornet when I was 6 years of age. My parents were Salvation Army officers, so I grew up in a household where brass instruments and piano and singing were continuous. That these sounds probably came to me when I was in my mother's womb, so so it came to me that way. And so playing solos, playing melodies, playing in chamber ensembles, they were all part of my DNA even before I got to Eastman. And that chamber music aspect held me in good stead in my earliest years with the National Arts Center Orchestra, because um, the orchestra, whose music director at that time, the founding music director, was Mario Bernardi. Um, his musical DNA was clarity, balance, intonation, and refinement. So those are things, and technique. You know, you just had to have tons of technique. Those are things which I pretty much had, and that's why I was able to fit in. And as the orchestra evolved in its repertoire and it got larger, um, I was able to expand with that and grow as an artist. Um, because certainly when I started playing, I would call myself a craftsman. I might be able to think of myself as an artist now, 50 years later, but I also know that there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn every single day.
And in terms of injuries, that's obviously a big topic for me here with the Trombone Academy. Could you expand on that, please?
Certainly. Um, with the number of with the amount of practicing that I do, because to me practicing makes possible rehearsals and performances. So I was always in a regular habit of practicing anywhere between 2 to 4 hours a day, depending on what the schedule was with rehearsals and concerts. Also, in my earliest years, I had great aspirations, as every young trombonist should do, of taking auditions. So when auditions in this major orchestra came up, auditions in that major orchestra, I would add additional practice time. And it was in those instances where I found that my tendonitis really ruptured. And there was one orchestra audition where I was doing extra rehearsals, not extra personal practice, and it was in I was still here in Ottawa in February, and I had to chop some ice off of my driveway. Here we are, the dead of an auto winter, and just that banging of the chopping, and I wasn't smashing, I was just doing it, but that additional different sort of pressure triggered the tendonitis. And at that point, um, I had a lot of various different methodologies to treat the tendonitis, but I basically kept on playing through it.
Do you mean that it stayed basically till the end of your career, or?
Oh no, no,
Okay.
it actually went away
Mhm.
with the various physiotherapy methodologies, one of which included acupuncture. So um, uh, as with all trombonists, most tendonitis it will invariably be in your left hand. And so this physiotherapist had been to China and had studied this type of acupuncture, where they put pins around your wrist and then up just below your elbow, and connect those pins with electrical wire, and there's this little battery device where he would turn up the very, very slowly the voltage of the current going through, and the actual muscle started to quiver. If the battery was too high, then he just slow it down. Again, it's my very amateur approach to it. Physiotherapy and that acupuncture are ways in which you can encourage blood flow to the damaged tissues. In reality, the pain will eventually go away when the body heals itself. These physiotherapy methods help to mask and disguise the pain. They allowed me, at least, to continue playing. But time is the great healer. And at different stages in my career, I had 3 episodes of this tendonitis. But I just played through it.
Really, that's fantastic. That's fascinating, because most people would say that number one is rest.
Rest is important. Rest is important. But if you're only playing 6 hours a day, there's still an awful lot of hours of rest. And if you're able to spread out those 6 hours and manage the time, obviously there were things that I would not force myself to do through the pain, in terms of excessive high register or continuous long playing. So you're holding it. There was putting the horn down a lot, but I continued to play.
Wow. I had the same thing when I went to Rotterdam, actually, with Ben van Dijk, but I got it on my slide arm. And
interesting.
Yeah. And eventually, because I got there and it was, hey, your slide isn't fast enough. So I overdid it with that slide work. And eventually, actually, there was some specialist music department in a hospital in Amsterdam, I think, or even Den Haag, and they showed me some specific stretching as well, up against the table, that kind of thing. And as you said, probably blood flow stretching that did help to get it. Unfortunately, it went up to my neck, where the kind of chronic thing stayed. But actually, the point I want to make, especially to the audience, as you said acupuncture, physio, for me too, stretching, is that there's so many solutions when a problem comes, and I could only urge people to search for solutions as soon as something like that comes. Speak to people who've been through it, and begin the healing.
Well, one of the biggest bit of advice that I got after my first bout of tendonitis was an explanation as to why it occurred in the first place and how to prevent it from coming back. And as most of us realize, our body is split in half. We have balancing muscles, but we have equal muscles, the same muscle on the left side of our body as we do on the right side of our body. And it's up to us, certainly as trombonists, not just to think of strengthening the left side, but to strengthen the whole body, so that there is as much a sharing of the workload. And so once I got through the pain, I then was sent to another physiotherapist who's started me with just basic muscle exercises, and expanding. And when that happened, I went for years and years and years and years without tendonitis. And human nature being what it is, now I'm Superman. I don't have to work these weights anymore, and stretching was a huge thing. And lo and behold, I got another bout of tendonitis because I got off the wagon and got lazy and felt that I could master it. So stretching is essential, absolutely essential, and probably one of the things that I realized as I aged through and went through a 50-year career, the older you get, the more you have to stretch. Absolutely. Shoulders, arms, neck, waist, legs, absolutely. And you have to work on your breathing exercises more when you are aging. You have to work on basic lightweight weight exercises, because as you age, your muscles atrophy. It's just as the hair falls out, so does the muscle mass. So you have to make up for that. And if you don't, this is where some aging brass players, you begin to hear the quiver come in the sound. I don't know whether whether you've heard that, but that's because the overall ability to hold and maintain the instrument position and to breathe freely has been compromised just by not taking care of your body.
It's prophetic, I'm not sure if you remember, but I had that huge Shires bass trombone when I was in Ottawa 2007. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember asking you very sort of arrogantly, why don't you play a Shires? And I remember you talking about the weight, saying, I had the Thayers as well. It was one of the heaviest bass trombones I've ever played, probably on the
Yeah,
market. And you
yeah.
specifically said, I've got to play many hours. I want to play for another X years. I've got to look at the weight. There was a good gym in the university. I was doing a lot of weight building. I was pretty stacked then. I enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
doing that. I remember you warning me not to overdo that. You just mentioned weights, but I don't think you're talking about like serious bodybuilding
No, no.
mass.
No. It's strength and conditioning rather than mass building. And yeah, I I, I actually have never played a trombone that did have Thayer valves. So I'm now playing tine trombones which have Hagman valves. Um, but for me, for the orchestra, for the repertoire that we played, for the variety of chamber and solo music that I was performing in addition to orchestral music, at that time, that's where I felt that the Yamaha sound was best for me and best for the brass section and best for the hall, because you also have to choose an instrument that's going to work in the acoustics in which you perform. And at that time, that particular Yamaha model worked well for me.
That's interesting. That's exactly my next point, or almost my next point. The next one, still a little related to injury and equipment. You know how many guards or straps, rests, the ergo bone, all these things we have now on the market, and clearly they weren't all around when you began. So, what really interests me is how did you and the colleagues cope back then? Did we lose more colleagues earlier?
Very good question. Uh, I think the smart colleagues or colleagues that I am aware of, and I will name three very close friends. Gordon Cherry, principal trombone, retired of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. Vivian Lee, former student of mine, second trombone, retired with the Montreal Symphony, and Pierre Baudry, the bass trombonist of the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. All of those three, when they were getting towards their middle age, began having the problems with the holding up of the instrument. And rather than just trying to force through, they they searched out. In Gordon's case, the ergo bone had already been invented, so that worked out fine. For Viv and Pierre, they actually had a local machinist create the Montreal version of an ergo bone, which is basically the rod that was connected to a universal joint that was soldered to their trombones, and that's how they maintained a long career. Viv has only just recently retired, but Pierre is still performing. But the point is very well taken. Prior to those aids, we probably did lose a lot of trombonists to injury. I'm just not aware of personal friends that did, but it's somewhat isolated here in the far north.
Fair enough. I just remember, or put a different way, I could very honestly say without the ergo bone, I don't think I'd still be working as a bass trombonist. That
Mm,
thing just saved my career, as it were. I mean, I switched to it when I was studying. It was actually Ben Van Dyke who lent me his at the time. It was a godsend, and it was just so effective that I bought one as soon as I could afford it.
yeah.
And then for years it was kind of just a crutch when I needed it, and now it's a permanent thing. I have the carbon fiber models, which are so light that they work for a few minutes if need be. But yeah, that's a complete exception if I don't use the ergo bone. And that's why I constantly wonder, what did the last generations do? And
Yeah.
unfortunately, you do hear about so many we lost. Yeah, but
Well,
it's
if any diabolical inventor was to invent a brass instrument, which was the most awkward to maintain and to manipulate in an artistic way, there you have the trombone. You have this horizontal mass which keeps changing the weight distribution according to the hand slide. Plus, you have the back weight and the side weight, and it's. But then again, there is no instrument that I'm aware that's really been designed ergonomically. We all adapt. Everyone has their challenges, whatever instrument it is.
sure, but there's no doubt that the bass trombone's far more ergonomically terrible than, let's say, a tuba, which which can rest on a chair, etc. So
Absolutely.
we're in an extreme position, which is why I think it's so important in the trombone community to discuss these things. But I'm happy to say that these things are being talked about a lot more now. It seems there used to be a taboo about that, especially amongst professionals. They'd be afraid to risk their career, which of course I can understand.
Absolutely. Well, character assassination has been around for a very long time, and in a very competitive environment. If you figure that you can get a one up on a competitor by uh, challenging their strength quotient, uh, that that certainly did take place for sure.
Even amongst the friendliest of the friendly trombone mediating trombonists, yeah, competition and rife. You
Yeah.
briefly mentioned your choice of instrument and your switch. Would you be able to just briefly mention your instrumental career, as it were? You mentioned Yamaha Tyne. I believe you began with a Vincent Bach. Is that correct? Or
Well, actually, even before the Vincent Bach, my yeah, my as I mentioned earlier, and if I go on too long, cut me off. My parents were Salvation Army officers, and they really didn't make very much money. So the instruments that I played from age 6 up to when I went to university were all the instruments themselves were owned by the Salvation Army. So this was the case when I showed up at Eastman, because when I took lessons with Emery Remington, I explained to him that I had to hand in my Salvation Army bass trombone at the end of the summer, and I would show up in September, and he said, "Don't worry about it, we'll take care of it." So I showed up to Eastman without my own bass trombone, knowing that I'd be supplied. So Remington walked me down in my first lesson into the bowels of the basement underneath Eastman Theater, and I got this. I think it was a 73H. It was a single valve con. All right, and it was it was all right if I remember correctly, and there's some real trombone geeks that can set me straight. I think it still had the a tuning slide up on the crook. Remington passed away in my first semester as a student. Donald Knobb took over and started. Remington passed away on December 10th, 1971. And Donald Knobb, who is a bass trombonist and was already teaching at the Eastman School of Music, actually teaching tuba players. You may have heard of one of his students, Roger Bobo. And so Don Knobb took over the studio in January, knowing that there was another bass trombonist, friend of mine, Jim Daniels, and I both needed trombones. So he was definitely playing con at that time. He asked Con to send him 3 instruments, and they were 62H cons. So Don chose the best of the 3, and he let Jim and I choose which one that we would have. And so this was January of 1972, and for a princely sum of $375, I purchased a brand new con bass trombone. So I actually played that con all the way through my university years and my first years with NACO. And then I was a professional living in Ottawa. All these auditions were coming open, and they were being won by wonderful bass trombonists who at the time were playing Bach bass trombones. So I said, I'm going to have to join the bandwagon because everyone who's winning these auditions are playing the Bach 50B2. So I got it, but not only did it have the 9.5 inch bell, but it had what they called the pizza plate bells. They were 10.5 inch bells. They were monstrously wide, but lots of players were using them. For me and for the orchestra, I actually played it longer than I should have. It was just too tubby, and in the upper register, it was almost impossible to focus or to have a resonating sound. It had fantastic weight of tone and volume in the middle to the low register. That's really where it shone as an instrument, but it wasn't balanced, in my opinion, all the way through. So then there was a lot of pitch work, which we were able to do in Ottawa with touring musicals that came through Ottawa that were fit around the orchestra's performing schedule. So I was in the pit a lot, and the variety and styles that are required there, the Bach was like trying to drive a Mack truck when a Ferrari was needed. So I had a very good friend who worked at Yamaha at the time, and asked him to send me 2 of their bass trombone models. And I went backstage during a NACO rehearsal and asked my low brass colleagues to hear what I was playing, behind a screen. And my wonderful friend, the then principal tuba player, Nick Atkinson, when he heard this Yamaha, he said, "Keep that Yamaha and throw the Bach away. Don't play the Bach ever again in whatever circumstance." So that's where I had a very, very long and fruitful association with Yamaha, and they were very supportive of me all the time that I was with them. It must have been 25 years that I was playing the Yamaha, and for me, it just had the singing sound, the incredible evenness of intonation all the way through the range.
Was that the Xeno? Probably not the model before the Xeno.
It was the Doug model Xeno. So it was the YBL 822G. I think that was it, which is the dependent system, which harkened back to the first instrument that I purchased, which is the Con 62H, which is also a dependent rather than independent. Yeah.
And now we come to your final beast.
Okay.
Sorry, did I interrupt you? Did I interrupt you with the Yamaha? Was there anything else to add?
No. It again was for me an extremely versatile instrument. I was able to play orchestral repertoire. I was doing a lot of solo work, and it worked well. Capitol Brass Works was in its prime, and it just worked very, very well. And it also matched the sound of Nick Atkinson, who is an incredible tuba player. Playing many years with the double C Hirschbrunner. He had an F tuba, but he also preferred the E flat tuba. Coming from a British tradition, you would know that many tuba players in England and the UK still like to use their E flat tuba when that kind of lighter sound. They will choose the E flat over the F. Cross the channel to the continent, and it's the F tuba, and the B flat or the C.
Wait a minute, I'm on the continent.
I know you are. I know. and I see a tuba behind you.
Sorry, I was thinking, should that be here in the Trombone Academy? But I'm a fan of doubling. Yeah, no, that's a big German B flat.
Yeah,
You mentioned the Doug model. I just wanted to clarify: Doug Burton or Doug Yo model?
Doug Yo model. Yeah. Yes, he developed the Xeno line of bass trombones, and one was a independent and the other was a dependent. But both of them are wonderful. It just depends what you wanted to choose. My approach to the dependent was I would rather have the main tubing of the trombone cut into once with a valve rather than two cut-ins, because in my very simplistic acoustic engineering mind, I thought the less bumpiness, the more pure a tone. So then Nick Atkinson, after a wonderful career with NACO, retired, and we hired an incredibly gifted tuba player by the name of Chris Lee, who his sound is wonderful but different from Nick's. It's not better or worse, richer or poorer, but I wanted to blend more efficiently and more musically with the sound that now Chris was bringing to the fundamental bass line of the brass section. And that's when I began thinking my Yamaha is just sounding a little thin to match Chris's sound. So that's when I carefully, because Yamaha has been so good to me, and I still play my Yamaha occasionally, but I did go to the Tyne bass trombone. As I'm saying this, what led me to do that is, after having performed the Bartók Concerto for Orchestra solo many years on the standard B-flat trombone using double valve and flicking it, I was getting towards the end of my career, and I said, I want to really play this on a proper F contrabass trombone where I can go from 7th position and all the way up to first.
Wait a minute, a contra doesn't have 7 positions.
Oh, it does.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I thought, okay.
When you add the handle to it, which by the way costs about $400. Hang on. I'm
not surprised. Second. And Tyne probably 4,000. Yeah, please. And no rush. He opens the museum.
So when I talked to Ben Van Dyke, he made a couple of suggestions as to which Tyne model I should purchase, and it was the universal model that Zach Bond helped to design. So I was in touch with Tyne and actually was in contact with Max quite a bit as to what the various options are having. I got it months in advance of the performance of the Bartók, opened up the case, and just as you said, the way it came out of the case, there's no way that that there's a seventh position. There's a length of the slide which allows for it. So I quickly fired off a email to Max, and Max replied, well, you didn't tell me that you wanted it for the Bartók, but we do have a handle that we can sell to you, and that's it there. So
I have to admit, I did not know that existed for a contra.
Yep. Yeah.
I thought it was only for the Baroque bass sackbut.
Well, and I worked like crazy on it, and it sounded fantastic, if I have to say so myself.
Yeah. Any recordings available?
They're probably a in the house recording, because that's something that the NEC does, but that would only be released with the blessing of the artistic director and the artistic committee from the orchestra.
We'll talk about that again later. Behind closed doors.
Yeah. So actually, there are some photographs that we took backstage during the rehearsals of that, and also the performance, because for the Bartók performance, I had my Yamaha bass trombone, Tyne contrabass trombone. So I will have to send you that photograph so you can see it.
Why did you have both for the piece?
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, for the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, most of the piece is played on the regular bass trombone. It's only for the low C that comes in somewhat prior to the glissando, and then yeah,
So you switched for a select few bars.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah,
Now that
yeah.
sounds insane. I love doubling, but that switch, different mouthpiece size, etc. I guess you must have practiced the switch quite a lot.
Very much so. Preparation is the secret. If you want to know how to stay in the business for 50 years, you have to show up prepared. I remember reading an interview uh, done with a music journalist and George Zell, the conductor of the Cleveland Symphony. This would have been back in the 1960s. And at the very good question from the journalist said, Dr. Zell, how was your orchestra able to play at such a high standard when you know, just how is it possible? He said in response, every rehearsal is a performance. So you are expected to show up for every rehearsal as if the recordings mics are turned on. There's no such thing as kind of working up to a performance level. You're always at that level for every single rehearsal. You do your practicing at home, you do your preparation at home. You make sure that you practice 10% faster, 10% slower, 10% louder, 10% softer, so that whatever is demanded of you, you're able to do it, if not the first time, definitely the second time. But that only comes from preparation.
Incredible mindset and discipline. We'll come back to that word discipline a little later. But just to wrap up with the equipment, I saw on the lecture of Remington that you gave many years ago, at the very end, you mentioned this story with the Con 73, and you
Mm.
mentioned it actually being the TIS, the tuning and slide system. And it's the end of the video. I'm not sure if you finished the story on it, but you had something to say about the limitations of this TIS system. Um, was the slide too short, or do you remember making that point?
Yes, and at that time it was the Con 62H which had the tuning in the slide. It could have also been with the 73H which also had the tuning in the slide, but definitely the 62H. And yes, there was a problem. At the age that I have all these files. I'm trying to access them. What was that problem? Um, it was it was making sure that when you came to first position, that you hadn't altered the tuning slide too much in an outward fashion to lower the pitch, because you just couldn't bring it up. So that's what I seem to recall. But someone who is still playing a 62H and might be viewing this video will be able to, no, that's not the reason. This is the reason.
You know,
But
it's fascinating because I'm not sure you know this, but I have a Canstel 1662, which is a
okay.
copy of that instrument of the
Oh,
62H,
yeah.
and it has the TIS as well. I don't have that as an issue with the coming in. That's new to me. I have an issue
Good.
that the little screw isn't reliable enough, and when you stick the instrument on the stand or weighted on the ground, it can too easily compress
Mm-hmm.
that slide mechanism. Um, yeah, but that's interesting because I'm hearing all the time since years on the forums that Con 62H, especially if it's the Elcott model, is like the holy grail of bass
It is.
trombones.
It
The
is.
holy grail. Now that's interesting. You said 70. Did you say 70, 71 when you got it, or because that's the year where they left Elcott, as far as I know.
Yes, mine was still made in Elkhart prior to them going to uh, New Mexico and then Mexico. And they finally came back. And and again, it's funny how your memory works. I do remember when I purchased the 62H in January of 1972. It was called the Fuchs model, Fuchs. I don't know whether you've heard that associated with that
Absolutely,
model.
yeah. Fuchs, yeah, German
Yeah,
builder, right? Wasn't he?
yeah, and and it had the most warm, rich tone you could ever want. One of the reasons why I did um, move from my 62H to the Bach, the previous reasons which I gave to you were accurate, but I was playing in the brass quintet associated with the National Arts Center Orchestra, playing my bass trombone, as Donald Knobb did for many, many years with the Eastman School of Music Brass Quintet, playing the trombone part on his bass trombone. So I was doing this with a NACO brass quintet, and we had this concert at the External Affairs Building, which is down on Sussex Drive, not far from the Prime Minister's residence. A very, very um, high level, high pressure job. I was a young bachelor. I had a fancy car. I didn't have the same professional respect for my job that I have now. And I left too late, and I was in a rush to get in there for the downbeat. And in my hurry, as I was assembling my trombone, it was that close to the downbeat, I forgot to tighten the locking nut on my hand slide. And lo and behold, the trombone started to slip from my hand, and I moved quickly to catch it, while at the same time catching the slide of my 62H on the top edge of a nearby metal chair, instantly and completely denting the slide a minute before the downbeat. So one of the it's a wonderful design, because if I remember correctly, one of the reasoning for having the tuning slide in the slide itself rather than in the bow was that you had two parallel even bore tubes that were actually being moved, rather than up here where it's more narrow and it's wider on the bell side. So that was one of the concepts. It added weight to the slide, but that's something that you get used to. But in my case, having dented it, you had the dent from the outer slide being mirrored by where the little slide aspect of the tuning slide mechanism. And so here I was. My colleagues still shake their head. I had to play this brass quintet concert. There's nothing to do, and I sent it away to Giardinelli down in New York, which at the time was the place to have instruments repaired. And they did everything that they could, but the slide was never ever the same. The bell and the sound was wonderful, but the facility and the alignment just was never the same.
Bad luck, as if slides weren't sensitive enough, and then that model doubled that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we often learn the most from our mistakes. I was never that late ever before anything. After that, I was always well in advance of the time. And my wife Wendy will tell you that for 35, 40 years of my 50 years with the orchestra, I was in the Art Center an hour before the downbeat.
I remember a quote you gave me, actually, I believe from your father, saying if you're not there 10 minutes early, you're late.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because your mind isn't in it, your body's not in it. There are too many things that have to be taken care of mechanically, physically, psychologically before you place yourself in that performing position. Because if you treat it like a ho-ho social rehearsal, then blah, 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 blah. No, but this is your job. You're being paid for it. You're an artist. People expect the highest standard from you. And for me, that's how I do it.
It's funny. I used to have quite tardy punctuality too. It's changed as well. I notice also with the years, you just don't want to go through that stress anymore. And being early just has so many advantages. Being late will never have an advantage. So you can never really be on the bad side being early. So
No, no,
it's
no.
a win-win.
Yeah,
You might see some guys, you might see the conductor speak, you might be alone in the church with the conductor and just make some connections which would never otherwise happen.
absolutely. And for us in the art center, getting to know the stagehands, getting to know every member of the orchestra, not just the brass players. Everyone has is unique and interesting. That's one of the beauties about playing in a symphony orchestra. You have so many people who have incredible minds, incredible stories as to how they ended up where they are now, and what their aspirations are going for it. A family. Oh, it's just it's a wonderful, wonderful society to be a member of for sure.
A hotbed or a mixing pool, or what do they call New York, melting pot of artistic
Oh
genius.
yes, yeah,
It's yeah,
yeah. No,
very fruitful.
it's very very inspiring for sure.
That's that word sums up my year in Ottawa for sure. Before we leave the equipment rabbit hole, as I say, would you still mention maybe a little more briefly the mouthpiece journey you went through?
Okay, happy to. When I my journey was cornet, trumpet, tenor trombone, bass trombone, and my first bass trombone mouthpiece, fortunately, was a Bach 1.5G. That was for many many years the standard entry level bass trombone mouthpiece, and I actually know many bass trombonists who continued to stay with that mouthpiece. Um, I gradually went to larger Bach bass trombone mouthpieces incrementally. Again, I was playing a con bass trombone at the time, and for better or for worse, the bass trombone concept in North America was getting bigger, fatter, and more tuba-like. Now, I don't agree with that, but that's the way it was. And you aren't going to turn this aircraft carrier around because that's where it was headed. Fortunately, it has reverted back, but for decades, that's kind of what the bass trombone concept was in North American orchestras, large orchestras. So then I started gravitating towards the Schilke line of bass trombone mouthpieces. Um, what worked best for me with the Schilke was the 59. I went to the Schilke 60, which a lot of my professional colleagues were using, and for me, the 60 was great again in the middle low register on a Bach bass trombone, but for the high register, it was just this diffusive, mysterious sound where there's no center of the pitch. It was, so I just backed off a bit. And then the other thing that you inherit with more or less off the shelf models is the contour of the rim itself. And for me, the Bach bass trombone mouthpiece rim was far too rounded. The Schilke mouthpiece rim was rounded but thin as well. So the thinness, in my opinion, tended to decrease endurance time in the upper register. The tenor trombone students that I had, I I actually had a chat just a couple of days ago with a former student, and this is name dropping, shameless name dropping. Pete Sullivan, principal trombone player of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. We were talking about his first year, his audition coming into a first year, and I'll skip that. It was a fantastic audition, but soon after he started lessons with me, I switched him to a Dennis Wick 5BL mouthpiece, which was a nice medium large tenor trombone mouthpiece. And the Dennis Wick contour of the rim tends to be much flatter with a much sharper inside edge, which for me as a bass trombonist makes a lot of sense because we have wide leaps and often at very, very loud or very, very soft, very, very short at times. And for me, roundness led to slippage. flat with a sharp edge. They were solid, and everything stayed in place. So that's when I started experimenting with different custom mouthpieces, Giardinelli and screw rim mouthpieces. And I finally, also with my own body and skin, I discovered that silver-plated mouthpiece left me with quite a substantial rash because I was allergic to silver plating. So I had to have gold plating. Well, gold plating is a very soft metal, precious metal, precious being expensive, and I ended up having to either buy whole brand new mouthpieces or get them replated. And then this went on for years. It was far too expensive because I practiced a lot and played a lot. And then someone said, "Well, there's this company called Giddings and Webster out on the West Coast, and they make stainless steel mouthpieces." And so it's not silver plated, it's not gold plated, it's stainless steel. And if you wanted to pay a premium rate, you could have one made of titanium, but I didn't need to go to titanium. Anyways, the stainless steel substance had absolutely no irritation to my sensitive lips, and I worked on various versions of their mouthpieces and ended up using the Giddings and Webster for these various instruments. And I would get in touch with Ivan and say, "I'd like to keep my Douglas Burden mouthpiece, but change the receiver to match the receiving bore of this Yamaha and of this Time," and he did. So that's where I went. It's basically that the sound and the contour of a Schilke 59, but with a slightly different back bore and a very different rim for sure.
So you're definitely in the category of you find what works and then you stay with it. You're not a switcher.
No. I've never followed that. I'm not criticizing those individuals who do, and I'm so thankful that I'm not a principal trombonist having to play alto trombone one day, a Pops concert next week, Schumann the week after that, and Bruckner the week after that. That's fine. I don't have any problem with tenor trombone players choosing to change their mouthpiece, as long as they're doing it for an artistic choice and not out of fear. Oh, the only way I'm going to be able to play these high notes is to use a smaller mouthpiece. That ends up poorly, in my opinion.
We got through the mouthpiece talk. Safe. the 100 comments will come just about that. What was the name of your Giddings model then? Was it your own signature?
It was. It ended up being my own signature. Their off the shelf models, if I remember, are based upon different winds. Kharif was one, I think. And then there's a hot wind from the desert. What was that one called? Senior moment. And then there was the nor'easter. Ed Herman. Not Ed Herman. The bass trombonist with the New York Philharmonic for many years.
Don?
Pardon me?
Don? Was he called Don?
Don Harwood. Thank you, Don Harwood. His signature model was kind of based on the nor'easter, but they're wonderfully crafted, stainless steel, or the premium version is titanium. And again, with this concept of wind. But I have my name chiseled on the side of it.
Fantastic. Does that mean it is in theory others could buy that, or uh,
They probably could, but it's certainly not advertised on the website. I don't have that type of a following or draw, but I'm sure that Ivan has it in his on his computer base and could be able to pull up what I eventually chose.
just to round off that mouthpiece topic, with the Canstel I mentioned, the 1662, it's a wonderful horn, but the connection to the double valve range, especially the C and the B, I was never happy with. I never found it open enough.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had tested nearly every mouthpiece brand. Actually, Giddings is one of the few I've never played, I believe. But then recently I got my first Doug Elliott mouthpiece, and
Okay.
surprisingly enough, that's the first mouthpiece that has helped that connection in that register. I did not think that could be the case with any mouthpiece, but in a sense, it solved that problem. People were saying to me, I tried change lead pipes, etc., but that would have meant ordering them from the States. I might still do that, but in the end, this Elliott mouthpiece actually, at least that problem was solved, which I think is spectacular. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that's good or bad news for the community.
Right, right. Well, even though I spent a long time talking about mouthpieces, what I described would have spanned 25 years. Um, I wouldn't consider myself a mouthpiece geek. I wouldn't consider myself a lead pipe geek. Um, I still think that much of the sound that comes out of your instrument is really generated by what you imagine and what you want to sound as what the audience will hear, and that's why you have to record yourself a lot. And I think there was one article that I read where there was a kind of a blind test with a very fine trombonist, and it was behind a screen. That individual would change lead pipes, would change mouthpieces, and they would record the same excerpt or the same solo. And listening back, someone who didn't know what had happened, each of them sounded the same. Because I think it still is the human element, the artist, what they put into the instrument is only going to be amplified by the instrument. If you think the instrument's going to give you a great sound, it will to a certain degree. But garbage in, garbage out. You know, excellence in, excellence out.
Starting to get into Arno Jacobs territory, which we may touch on later. We're still in the performance section of this interview now. I'd like to jump to listening recommendations. I know you're an avid listener, and there's 3 categories I'd like you to name at least one record that you'd recommend. How about specifically for the bass trombonist? Where would you direct us?
Well, I have grown up and had a profession in an era which has been filled with incredible bass trombonists, and we have benefited from their artistry and from their recordings. I wouldn't want to place one above the other, but Doug Yo, Ben Van Dyke, Blair Bollinger, Randy Haas, John Rojak. Those are probably the quintet of solo bass trombone recordings which have set the standard, which have introduced new repertoire, new transcriptions, new original compositions for the instrument, and are such wonderful inspirations. Because when I was a student, there virtually was nothing, you know. Even tenor trombone solo albums, there was hardly anything. But now it's just incredible. So for bass trombones, get all of those 5 recordings, and with
The
some of
problem
those
there
things.
is Doug, each of those artists have several recordings.
Exactly. Ben Van Dyke and Doug Yo leading that, but each of them is worth it, and it's also a great way for students to learn the repertoire. All right. Um, the choice of solos that Ben has used on for his many solo recordings are just wonderful. It's a great stepping stone, and it's a great beacon to aim for.
Thank you. How about for the musician in general? Where would you?
It's voice, voice, voice. Listen to singers. Listen to singers. Um, I made a list of a whole bunch of singers, uh, but if I had to choose one, it would be Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. And shortly after he passed away, Deutsche Grammophon released this box set of CDs, which had virtually every recording that he made with Deutsche Grammophon. To have the image and the imagination, and the goal of sounding like a great singer is the most important thing, in my opinion, for any brass player, and particularly for a bass trombonist. One has to learn to sing through the instrument, because singers have to use the air the air that they inhale, turn it into wind. There's articulation. That's the diction of our tonguing. There's vowels, a variety of consonants, and it all comes out in whatever language is being sung by that particular singer. And the type of recordings that I like listening to with singers tend to be lieder rather than opera. Although I do have some favorite opera arias or opera. But Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, these are some of the names which might date me, and they run the gamut of soprano, mezzo, tenor, baritone, bass. And pardon my pronunciation as I go through. Teresa Berganza, Montserrat Caballé, Victoria de Los Angeles, Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau is at the top of my list. Tito Schipa, Fritz Wunderlich, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, Alfredo Kraus, and Alexander Kipnis. Those are my vocal heroes, and yes, I will also listen to cellists. I rarely listen to pianists unless I'm when I played my first Chopin piano concerto, which is scored for bass trombone, then I listen to lots of recordings of that, because both of the Chopin piano concertos have these solo bass trombone parts, which you have to know inside and out, mainly because the rests are so long, and you have to be counting. But if you get mixed up, your knowledge of the music will verify that your numerical counting is accurate or wrong, and you have to come in.
I remember seeing once in a Wagner piece, somebody had timed how long the break was, 12 minutes, whatever. This point is incredible, is how few young students do that. They really know that orchestral piece so well that they could just rely on that. I mean, that took me a few more years to really realize that that's your ultimate security, is just the oral capacity.
You have to know the music. You have not just you have to know the whole piece. I was in our brass studio class with the students at Ottawa U. We've been working on mock auditions for the past few weeks, because this is audition season for anyone wanting to get into summer orchestras, wanting to get from bachelor's into a graduate program. So the auditions, and what students often don't realize is that the committee members who are listening to you play your excerpts, 10 measures, they know the whole piece. You have to know the whole piece. because the piece doesn't just consist of 10 measures, which you might play to perfection. But what if one of the committee members were to ask to start 3 measures ahead of what has been bracketed on what you're given? And I gave an example of a recent list supplied to candidates for the principal horn job in the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. A wonderful orchestra, plays everything. The list read: Mahler, Symphony Number 1, Mahler, Symphony Number 2, Mahler, every Mahler symphony, not first movement from measure to. You have to know the whole piece. If you want to play in an incredibly fine orchestra, you have to know much more than just the excerpts. Yes, you need to perfect the excerpts, but you have to know the catalog. Listen, 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 and enjoy it and love it.
So often you hear from older teachers, they reflect that they just wish the students would listen more. I'm surprised too, just how talking with colleagues that listening doesn't seem to be integral to some musicians' lives. I'm not sure how that's possible, but
well, if I could add a footnote to that, as a teacher, unfortunately, a lot of the listening, which when it takes place now, is listening YouTube clips of first and second and third year student solo recitals, and that is not at a level that will inspire you. That will lead you to mediocrity, and sometimes you only get what you pay for. And not that old is better, because there are great recordings now, but listen to the people who are at the peak of their profession in their art form or their instrument, because that's the only way that you really get inspired.
So now the challenge seems to be a kind of curative one. So curation to get the right quality out is kind of what I'm hearing. Big new issue that we have too much available and we need to find the pearls in between.
Very, very well put. Yes, absolutely.
That's why asking your generation is not a bad idea. There were some singers I'd never heard of from your list, so I'm going to list that up in the comments perhaps. I love singers too. I actually had a strong Dichterliebe phase after I studied in Canada. That Dichterliebe Fischer Dieskau was round the clock for a number of months.
When you hear his sound and the changing of the color and the diction in all registers, it just elevates what you need to bring to your own instrument. Yeah, it's just, and the sound painting, it's just incredible.
Finally, on the listening track, what about your own recordings? What are you most proud of? Where would you say, hey, that's Doug Burden at his best?
Well, I don't think I've ever been recorded at my best, but what is recorded and what is probably the easiest to be heard, and you made me aware of a vinyl recording of that you came across this when you were doing some transferring a number of years ago, but it's the Richard Strauss Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, and it's a suite that was put together by Strauss from the opera Ariadne auf Naxos, and it's scored for 1 trumpet, 1 trombone, which is a bass trombone, 2 horns, and I think single woodwinds, and a reduced string section, percussion, and quite an extensive piano part. So the bass trombone part is really quite exposed whenever it's heard. Having said that, every time you play the bass trombone, everyone can hear it, whether you're playing pianissimo, because pianissimo on a bass trombone can easily drown out 4 violas playing mezzo forte. So whatever you play is a solo, but you have some nice melodic lines in this Bourgeois Gentilhomme. And it was an RCA recording conducted by a Mexican conductor, Eduardo Mata, who was rising in world estimation, but unfortunately died an untimely early death. He was kind of bon vivant. He was a pilot, and he unfortunately, I think, crashed on takeoff, uh, piloting either his own plane or a rented plane, and we are unfortunate that we don't have his legacy to continue. But I am proud of that recording.
Do you know if
Um,
it's still on, if it's on streaming currently?
I haven't checked. I haven't checked.
So NACO
Uh,
Strauss Mata, you said, with MA.
yeah, yeah. Eduardo Mata, Mata. Yeah. So that.
I bought the record used in a market in Rotterdam.
Well, it came out. I'm thinking somewhere in the late 1980s, maybe. So it came out on vinyl, and it came out on cassette from RCA, and I think may have also been re-released on CD, but I'm not quite sure about that. I think I have both the vinyl and the CD. Yeah.
I was disappointed. We were talking last week about Capital Brassworks, your ensemble, that they don't seem to be on streaming your records.
No, when I left the management capacity with the group, but it still continued to play till we disbanded a few years ago. We were looking into that, and I was adamant that the royalties that should be due the composers be paid, and I'm not, and I was I was thwarted with every effort in trying to find a streaming platform many years ago. That's not to say now it cannot be done, but it's not my job. And like you, I would love to see those recordings available on streaming, because the whole landscape of the recording industry has totally changed. Totally
Is
changed.
there any hope that that might happen with from those records?
I think there is hope. Yes, it just takes an individual to grab it by the teeth and see it through to the end. Um, because the hurdles and the royalties and the copyright issues and you know the the days of the recording artist making a lot of money are at almost at an end. That's why you have so many orchestras still wanting to travel live, so many rock groups going back on the road because they need the income from live performances. So it's maybe a good thing in some ways.
Maybe it can balance itself out. I find it a tragedy that the recordings have lost their financial appeal to the artist. Hopefully, maybe the circle can turn again a bit in the other direction.
Yeah.
That brings me precisely to the next point: a tricky issue: pricing and pay.